All right, good evening. Excuse me. Good evening. It is 6 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. So the material for this week is about arrays. Now, arrays look similar to some of the things that we've already done in class, but there's more to arrays than what we've done so far. So an array is also like a string. Remember from last week, we said a string is just a list of characters, right? That's what a string was from last week. Well, an array is also a list, and you'll actually hear me use the word array and the word list interchangeably. They really mean the same thing in Python. But an array is just a more than one element. You'll hear that word element. And instead of just keep on saying words you may not know yet, let's actually do some Python code with arrays. So to make an array, you have a variable name, just like you would for any other variable. And then you have these brackets, this open and closed bracket here. And in between here is where you could put what the array contains or what are its elements. An element is an individual item inside of that array. Let's stop right here for a second and let's print out the type of A. And if we print out the type of A, we should see that it says array, or it may say list. Let's run that, Python 3 of my file. If I run that, it tells me, yeah, it's a list. But as I said, a list and array is the exact same thing as far as Python is concerned. Some websites and some teaching material, you'll see array, some you'll see list. Regardless, an array and a list are the same thing. So Python tells us that this variable A is a list. And it's a list because this is how we declared it. We declare it with this open and closed bracket. Now, if we print A, it will print all of the elements of that array. But right now there is none. So watch what happens here. It just prints out the brackets with nothing in between because we don't have anything in our array yet. Let's put some stuff in there. Let's say we want to put some letters in our array. Let's say we have A, S, D, and F. That's how we put items in the array. And they are separated by a comma. So A is what we call the first element. That's the second element, the third element, and the fourth element. So when we print this out now, you'll see it is all of those individual items. Okay. Now, they don't even have to be the same type. You know, A is, you know, it's a string, right? Well, it's an individual letter, but it's still a string. We can have the second one as that, which is a string, right? We can have an integer. Let's have 42. And we can have a float, right? And that's fine. The elements in an array don't have to be the same type. 99% of the time, they will be the same type because you usually use arrays to group together common values. But they don't have to be. As you can see here, they can be different types. And so this works just fine if we want to print it out. As you can see, it prints out this list containing all those elements. All right. But for now, let's just keep them all the same type. Because as I said, 99% of the time, your elements will be the same type. All right. So in here now, I have an array, and it has these four individual items, these four individual elements in this array. Okay. So how do we traverse this array? And by traverse it, I mean, how do we access individual elements of the array? Yeah, actually, let's talk about that first. Well, it's kind of like the string from last week. If you remember the string from last week, you know, when we had a string is equal to ASDF, right? that's the string, the first letter is index 0, right? Let's make that a comment. Oops. Let's make that a comment. That is equal to A, right? S index, oops. I typed the right keys. That is equal to D, S, and so on and so forth, right? You know, this is what we call the index, and this is how we access individual characters within that string. We're saying string S, index 0, and remember the indexes start at 0. They don't start at 1. It's the same for all programming languages, and so it remains the same in Python, that the first letter is index 0. The second letter is index 1. You see, it's kind of always offset by 1 because you start counting at 0. That's 0, that's 1, that's 2, and that's 3, right? And so this is exactly what we did last week with strings. And lists, arrays are the same way. So A of 0 is equal to A. A of 1 is equal to B. Actually, let's print these out so you can see it. Let's print out A of 0. And so if we print that out, we're just going to get the letter A. If we run it, sure enough, we get the letter A. If I say print out A of 3, what am I going to get? Well, what element is the third index? Well, this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. So this should print out an F. Save it and run it. Sure enough, it prints out the F. So that's how we can access individual elements in this array. The array, the variable, is all of the elements. But when we access it like this, A at index 3, we're accessing one single element in that array. And in this case, the third one is the F. Now, with that being said, we can change the value of individual elements in an array. So if I have A2, you know, which one is that? That's this one right here, right? Because this is 0, this is 1, this is 2. So right now, A of 2, A at index 2 is the letter D, right? Let's print that. But we can change the value if we want. Let's change it to 42. Just change it to a number. And now let's print it out again. Actually, we'll just print the whole array here. So what we're doing is we're making the array. We're going to print the entire array. We're going to change an individual item in that array. And then we're going to print the whole array out again. And you'll see that this D is going to, this element is going to change from a D to the number 42. Save it and let's run it. Sure enough, you have ASDF, then you have AS42F, because we use this to change the value of an individual element in that array. And you can do it for all the values. You change this to Q. Save it and run it. And sure enough, the 0 element changed from an A to a Q, because that right there is how we change individual elements in the array to a different value. Okay. So how do we traverse this array? And when I say traverse the array, I mean access each individual element in a loop. And we did this last week with strings, and we'll kind of do the same thing this week with lists, almost the exact same. The first way is with this, for, let's say E in A. And then let's print E. Let's talk about this for a second. So E here is a variable name. A here is a variable name, but A is our list. So we're saying for each variable in this list. So what this will do, it'll loop how many ever elements you have in here. So the first time in the loop, this variable E is going to be the letter A because that's the first thing in the list. The second time through the loop, the variable E is going to be equal to this S. The third time it'll be the D, and the fourth time it'll be the F. So this will loop how many ever times? It'll loop over all of these values, all of these elements, but you'll access them one at a time, and you'll access them with the variable E. So what we're going to do here, we're going to loop over the entire list, and each time we're going to just print out what this variable E is. And as I said, E will be these individual elements, but one at a time. So here, let's print out the whole array. Then we'll loop through the array and just print them one at a time. So let's run it. Oh, I didn't save it. Let's save it and then run it. And there you go. There is the whole array. That's the print A. And then here's the loop. Actually, so we know we're doing the loop. Let's print the word looping. Actually, let's print start loop. So you can see where the loop starts and ends. End loop. Let's do that. So in our printout, you can see the beginning of the loop and the end of the loop, right? So let's run it. So there we go. That is the print A statement on line 2. And then we start during our loop. We're going to start the loop. Then we're going to print the variable E, which is this A. Then it ends the loop. Then we're going to go back and start the loop again. And it prints an S this time because that's the next one. It starts the loop again, and it prints the D, which is the next one. Then it does another loop and prints the F, which is the next one. So each time through the loop, we have accessed the individual letter in this list. And we can do whatever we want with it. You know, print E, that's not that useful. Actually, let's change these to numbers. 1, 6, 3, 7. Let's just say that's a number. Let's say for some reason we wanted to do some kind of math, right? We'll say the V is equal to E plus 1. And then we're going to print out V. So what is that doing? So it's going through the loop. It's accessing these numbers one at a time. Each time it's adding 1 onto the value, and then it's going to print them out one at a time, right? Let's run this. As you can see, there is our list. There's our array. That's that print A. And now, as you can see, I accessed each of these values one at a time, added 1 onto it, and then printed it out. And as you can see, it's 2748. That sure enough is 1 added to each of those values, right? I mean, it's important to note at the end of this, though, this doesn't change what's in your list, right? Even if we put E here, this will not change the original value of your list. The original value of your list is 1637. This is going to access each element, add 1 onto it, and then print it out. And then it'll print the list out again, right? You'll see that this did not change what was in your original list. We accessed each element and we did some math with it and we printed it out, but it didn't change what was actually in the list. If we wanted to change what was in the list, remember, we have to do something like this, right? That's how we change what is actually in the list. So with this kind of for loop, you can do something with each element, but you can't change what's in the list, what is actually in that list. Right. Let's look at 2 other loops where we can do that. Actually, we'll look at one other list. Yeah, excuse me. We'll look at another loop to where you can change the values. All right. So let's look at the other one. And it'll be for I in the length of A. And then I'll type it all out and then we'll discuss it. Okay. So here we have our original list. We're going to print out the list. Now we have a few things going on here. Remember before we had for E in array like that, right? And these variable names, it doesn't have to be E, it doesn't have to be A. You know, this variable name can be whatever. As long as you make them match, that's fine. You know, I just made it this one letter long, so it's easier to follow what we're doing. Likewise, this E doesn't have to be E, it could be that. That would be fine, as long as that's how you access and use it. So it's just a variable name, as long as it uses the same rules for any variable in Python. All right, so this is the way our two loops are set up. We already went over this one. Now for this one, we have for I in the length of A. We've already seen the length before. You know, when we did strings, it tells you how long the string is. Well, when you do the length of A, it tells you how many, actually, oh, I missed one thing here. Range. Oh, there we go. And I'll explain what that is right now, actually. So you know what the length of A is, right? The length of A tells you how many elements are in here. So when I say the length of A, it's going to tell me 4, because there are 4 elements in here. If I would add more, now if I do length of A, it's going to be 5, because there's 5 things in here, right? Now this I in range, what does that do? What it'll do is it will allow you to loop this many times, but it'll start counting at 0. So let's think about this for a second. And I will be equal to how many times this loop so far. So let's see how that's useful. So let's do a little bit of pseudocode here. So the first time in this loop, I will be equal to 0. The next time I is 1. Then I will be 2. Then I will be 3. Then I will be 4, and it'll stop. So if the length of A is 5, why does it stop at 4? That's because we started counting at 0. So it has looped 5 times. That's 5 loops right there. Right? So this will loop how many ever the length of A times is. If I had 500 elements in A, it would loop 500 times. But since I have 5 elements in A, it'll loop 5 times. And each time, this variable I will be these values. And so how does that help us? Well, if you see here, I'm saying A at index I. Well, the first time of the loop, I is 0, right? So this is saying A at index 0 is equal to A at index 0 plus 1. And what is A at index 0? It's the first thing. So I'm saying A at index 0 is equal to 1 plus 1. So A at index 0 is now 2. The next time, so that's that time, right? That time is done. Put X there or something. Now, the next time in the loop, I is 1. So I'm saying A at index 1 is equal to A at index 1 plus 1. This is A at index 1. So it takes 6 plus 1 is 7. And then it stores it in A at index 1. So it changes this from a 6 to a 7. And the same thing the next time in the loop, I is 2, then I is 3, then I is 4. So this is how you can access each individual element in there. So if we did it like this, right? This is still accessing each element, adding one, but it's storing it in E. It's not changing the original value of the list, right? So if we just run this, we're going to get pretty much what we got before. You know, the original list. This is all of the looping it did and printing out the E, and then the original list again. But with this kind of loop, we can change the value of the list like this right here. We're saying the A at index I is now a new value. So if we save and run this, there we, oh, I'm printing E. Let's just take that print statement out of there. If we run it, now we have the original list, and now we have the same list, but the values have been changed. So imagine, and this is kind of ties into your assignment, imagine you have a list of values and you want to do some kind of mathematical operation on them. Let's say we want to multiply by 2 and add 1 to each value. You know, just some mathematical formula that you want to apply to each value and then print out the results. Well, this is how you would do it. You would have your array of values. You would loop over all of them. You would do some kind of mathematical formula on it, and then you print them out again. So if we run this, you can see that's the original list. This is the same list, but with that mathematical formula applied to each of the elements. And this is close to what you need to do for your assignment. So that right there is how we can modify individual items in the list. This is how we can traverse the list. Traverse the list means to loop over all the individual elements. All right. Let's go on and talk about, let's make this shorter. Let's go on and talk about operators. Well, we can use the plus and the multiplication on arrays. Now, how does that work? Let's say we had another array B is equal to 2, 7, 1, or 2, 7, 4, right? So we have these two arrays. What do you think happens when we do this? Prints, and then we'll print out C. What this does, it just concatenates these two lists onto each other. What does concatenate mean? It just puts the two lists together, one after the other. So as you can see, A is just 163, B is just 274. I'm making C is equal to A plus B. And then when we print that out, you can see it's the list A followed by the list B, all in one list. So if you had two lists that you needed to make together into one list, you could do it just like this. And you could do it like this. You don't have to make a new one. Let's say we have a list A and we want to put into it all of these other values. And we could just do it like this. Make A is equal to A plus B. And now A, I mean, printout would be the same. A is now equal to both lists combined together. That's what you can do with the plus sign. What can you do with the multiply sign? Well, the multiply sign doesn't work with two lists. It works with a list and a single number times 2. So what do we think happens here? What will happen here is it will take this original list and it will repeat it this many times. So if we have 163 times 2 and we print it out, you can see it's 163, 163. If we did A times 10, you can see it's 163 repeated 10 times. So that's how you can use a plus and a multiply with lists. Now, a subtraction does, let's put our B back up there. 2, 4, 7. Can we do A minus B? Can we do that? We can't do that. And why can't you subtract lists? Well, if you think about it, it doesn't, is there a logical thing you could think of that would make sense if you use a subtraction sign? Maybe, let's say if this was a 1, maybe you could say, well, if we subtracted these lists, then it would just take out the 1 or something. Maybe you could logically make that argument, but it's not how Python works. There just is no subtraction sign. There's only plus with 2 lists. And like I said, the multiply is with a number, right? You can't add with a number either. See, you can't add a number. You can only add a list, or you can multiply with a number. And that's the way it works. And there you go. So that's really the only operators you can do with lists. All right. The material for this week also talks about slices with the list. I am not going to go back over and talk about slices again. The slices work the exact identical way that they do for strings. And I covered that extensively in the video from last week. So if you want to hear me talk all about slices, then go back and watch last week's video about strings. And just anytime I say string, replace it with list, and it works the exact identical same to that. So instead of spending 10 minutes going down that rabbit hole, review last week's videos to hear all about slices. All right. So moving on to, it's really the last topic, but there's a lot in it. We're going to talk about methods and functions with lists. All right. So there are a lot of built-in Python functions that you can do with lists. Let's add a couple more numbers in here so it gets longer and we can see what's going on with it. Okay, so let's say we have this list of numbers right here. Let's say we want to add an individual number onto the end of it. Let's say we want to get some user input. Say the user input this number. Enter a number. They enter a number I, and we want to add it onto the list. So let's print the original list. Let's ask the user for a number, and then let's add it or append it onto the list. And then we'll print it out again. Notice here I have the variable dot append. And inside the parentheses, I have what I want it to append. I want it to append this number that the user input. Let's save it and let's run it. You see, this is the original array. Enter a number 33. As you can see, 33 has now been appended or added into that list. It now contains that list. What if I wanted to do 5 numbers? I can do for I in range 5. There. Now I can type in 5 numbers. Let's see it. Enter a number. Let's just do 22, 33, 44, 55, 66. There we go. It let me input 5 numbers, and it appended each of those numbers onto my original array. So now I have more numbers in there. So that's what the append does. There's also what we call extend. So append is for individual elements. Okay. Let's say, what if we have another array, 33, 44, right? We can extend it, a dot extend C. So while append does an individual element, extend does another list. These two things, A equals A plus B, these two things right here are actually identical to each other. They get the same result. Okay. This extend is just a way to do it with a function. Let's print that out. And as you can see, oh, what did I mess up? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. It is not A equals that. It's just A dot extend B. Puts it in there. So as you can see, we have the original 1634 for A, 3344 for B. When I do A dot extend B, it just puts them into the same array right there into A. So A dot extend is the same thing as A equals A plus B. These two things right here are identical to each other. Okay. What would happen if I made a mistake and said A dot append B? Let's go back to my append example. Keep undoing. There we go. Remember, this is what append looked like, right? Append was a single element. So now what if we try to append a list? What is going to happen here? A dot append B, print A. So let's print A before the append, and let's print A after the append. Do you think I'm going to get an error? I actually won't get an error, but it will not be the result that you're expecting. Let's run it. So what happened here? This is the original A, 16347. And now after we append B, where B is another list. Well, look, we have a list within the list, right? This is B, but this list is an individual element of this larger A array. So as you see, this was the original A. This part is still the original A, but we have appended a list onto it. But it means an individual element is the list. So that's where you have to be careful. If you have two lists and you want to append them to each other, you actually need to use extend, or you can use the plus sign. The append treats this as an individual element, so it took B and appended it as an individual element within this A array. It's just something you have to be careful of when you're using append and extend. Okay. A couple other ones. For A, we can do A dot sort. This will sort the items in ascending order. As you can see, this is the original A. And as you can see, the numbers now are sorted in ascending order. That's pretty easy, right? That's actually fairly useful. One we've already seen is the length of A. You know, that tells you how many elements are in A. Run it. It tells me there's 5 elements in there. And that's right. You know, if we put more in here and run it, it now tells me there's 6 elements in there, which is correct. We can get the minimum value. Pretty sure we get the minimum value, and we can get the maximum value in A. Run that. It tells me the minimum value is 1 and the maximum value is 33, and that's correct, right? Okay. Let's talk about how do we remove items out of the list. So we've seen how to add items. How do we remove items? We can do it like this. We can do a.pop. What pop will do, it will remove the last item and it will return it. So if we print B here, and then we'll print A again. So if we do this pop, it will remove 7. It'll remove the last thing in the array, and it'll save it in B. And so if we print out B, we're going to get 7. And if we print out A, we're going to get this list, but it's not going to have the last element in it anymore. Run it. Nope. Python. There we go. Original list. We popped the last element, and now we have the array without the last element in it. That's if you don't give any value, if you give no argument to pop, no parameter. We can give pop a parameter and we can change which item it removes. So if we do pop 0, that will remove the item at index 0, which is the 1. If we do a pop 1, it removes index 1, which is 33. If we do pop 2, it will remove index 6. Or excuse me, it will remove index 2, which is the value 6. So if we run this, this is going to remove 6 out of there. Sure enough, 6 is what was removed. And now we have the list without the value 6 in there. That's one way with pop. We can also use, we call delete, DEL, the array and the index. So if we do this, this will also remove the element at index 1. The difference being we can't get the value anymore. You know, when I did pop, you know, we said B was equal to it. That means it'll give us the value that it removed. You know, if we pop 1, which is right here, then B will be equal to that value 33, right? Delete doesn't do that. Delete won't give us that value, but it allows us to remove it. So if we delete A at index 1, that's this guy right here. And if we print A again, we'll see we'll have the array, except 33 is now missing. It's been deleted. And the last way you can remove items from an array is you can remove if you know the actual value, right? We've been removing things or deleting things by the index, but we can delete it, excuse me, we can remove it by the value. So we can do it like this. A.remove and the value we want to remove. This is not the index anymore. It's the individual element we want to remove. We're saying we want to remove 33. We run this. Again, we can see we have this as the original array. We have removed 33 from the array. And you know, we can put 4 in here, right? If we run that, you know, this is the original array. Now this is the array with the number 4 removed from it. And that is the material for this week. Let me talk a second about the assignment, and then we'll go for questions. So for the assignment this week, you basically have to have the user type in a bunch of temperatures into an array, and then you need to do some math on it to convert it. I think you're converting it from Fahrenheit to Celsius, or it may be from Celsius to Fahrenheit, whichever the assignment says. And then you have to print out the original temperatures, then you have to print out the converted temperatures, and then you have to say, how many days were hot, how many days were cold, and how many days were warm, right? Well, I'll get you part of the way there. And actually we did it earlier, and so I'll just kind of recap it. Let's say we have an array A, and we want to put 5 numbers into the array. Number, enter a number. This is actually exactly what we did earlier in the lecture here, right? So if we run this, actually let's print out the A to start. So if we run this, we'll A for I in range 5. There we go. If we run this, you can see our array print A starts out to be empty. There's the array, but it has nothing in it. Now here we're going to loop 5 times, and each time in the loop we're going to have the user input a number. Oops, not I. Each time through the loop we're going to have the user type in a number, num, and then we're going to append it to the array, and then we want to print the array at the end. So enter a number, 44, 55, 66, 77, 88, and there we go. We have now asked the user to input 5 numbers and store them in this array, and that's the array. So after I've done that loop, I now have an array. I have a list of those numbers the user typed in. That's kind of what your homework is asking you to do, at least part of it. And then let's say we want to do a mathematical operation on that. So we can do for I in range the length of A, right? And if we want to, let's say we want to add 1 onto each number, A of I is equal to A of I, AI plus 1. So let's print A here, just so we can see what A looks like all the way through. So we have an empty array, and we just print it out. We're going to loop 5 times. Each time we're asking for a number, and we're going to append it to the array. Then we're going to print the array again. Then we're going to loop how many ever times there are number of items in the array. Each time we're going to change the value of the array, and this is how we do it. The array at index I plus 1. This is the math that I'm doing for this example, and then we'll print A again. So let's run that. Here we go. Enter a number 5 times, 22, 33, 44, 55, 66. There we go. There's the array after we've typed in the numbers. Here's the array after we've done our mathematical operation. Right? So this is actually stuff that we did a little bit earlier. I'm just kind of rehashing it for you. But this is kind of what your assignment should start looking like. You do have some more stuff to do down here. In your actual assignment, you need to count how many warm, cold, and hot days, right? But I'm going to leave that up to you guys. I can't give you everything. But this is what the beginning of your program should kind of look like. Okay, so I'll go ahead and open it up for questions.
I have a question that's not particularly concentrated into the lists. It's so I asked it earlier in the semester, and I wanted to know the answer, but I couldn't figure it out by myself. When we collect input, can we gather two input values at the same line of code and then use the values separately?
Yes, it is possible.
I was thinking with the pop to get the last one, but
yeah,
because b equals a, the pop can get you one value, but then
let's see if I remember this off the top of my head, and I'll show you. So let's say they input, A is whatever they're going to input. Actually, whenever you do input, it's automatically a string, right? Enter.
well, they are going, let's say in my particular case, I'm asking them for feet and inches, and then I'm converting the feet into inches and adding the inches together.
Okay.
But I want them to put their height in feet and inches next to each other so they don't have to hit enter and then go under.
Yep, I understand. But hear me out first. Whenever I do input, this is a string, right? So if I do, print type of S, it's going to tell me it's a string, because anytime we get user input, it is a string. So whatever. The class is string. So this is a string. S is a string. What we can do, I believe this is right. I think there's an S dot split. And let's print A. Let me see if this works before I go down explaining it. Yep, there we go. Okay. So just like we had all these other functions and stuff for strings from last week, there's one called split. And so if you imagine I type in a string that looks like this, 3344. Imagine that's what I type in at the keyboard, okay? So really, S ends up being the string, right? And so what split does, it will take this string and break it apart into the different values. And this right here is a blank space. So I'm saying anytime there's a blank space, then treat these as two different values. And this actually ends up being an array. So if you look at, what I printed here, when I printed A, this is actually exactly what we've been doing today with arrays. This is an array where the index 0 is 33. Actually, it's the string 33. And the index 1 value is the string 44. So what we could do, we could say first value is equal to the integer at A of 0. The second is the integer of A1. And then let's print the first, and let's print the second. So put in a bunch of prints here all the way through so we can see what's happening. All right, so let's run this, and then we'll look at the output and I'll explain it. So we run this, I type in 33, 44. There we go. So whenever I print S, it is the string I typed in is 33 space 44. That's the print S. When I do the S dot split, it will take that empty space and separate those as separate values. But it's still a string. That's why you have this list of two strings. That's the A, because this string was split into two parts. Right here where that space is. And so I have a list of the string 33 and the string 44. And so then A of index 0 is how I access that first one. And I'm saying, even though it's a string, I want to treat it as an integer and store it in the variable first. And then the same thing for second. I'm taking A at index 1, which is this string 44, converting it to an integer and then saving it as second. So finally, when I print out first and second, it is that first and second value that I typed in on the same line. And you're not limited to 2 values. For example, if I could type in, a bunch of values, and when I do that string dot split, it's splitting them all. Anytime there's a space, it treats it as a entirely new value, an element of this array. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. One thing I want to add on to that while somebody else is thinking of a question, it doesn't have to be a space. You could have it be a comma, if you want to put a comma there for some reason, or a hyphen, whatever character you want to put in there to denote separate values. So if I put a hyphen there, then I just got to put a hyphen between my values. And it does the same thing. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a space. A space usually makes sense, but it doesn't have to be a space. All right, I'll hang around for a couple more minutes if anybody thinks of a question. If not, feel free to drop off whenever you want, and I'll get the video uploaded and the link sent out a little bit later this evening.
Hello, Professor.
Yep, go ahead.
Would this also be another way to, I guess, get input by user for our assignment, or this just wouldn't be the way you prefer us to go about it?
I would say I would prefer that you use a loop to get those temperature input values. But if you did this and it worked, that would be acceptable. But the reason why I wouldn't want it like this is, so your assignment's asking you to input, I think it's 10 temperature values. I think it's 10, maybe it's 7, but whatever the case is, it's more than one. So I think it's 10 values. So, if you did that, you did the A dot split, and you started doing these, instead of second, let's just name them something different, because you got to have different variable names for each thing. And then you'd have A1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth, right? Let's just, this is what, 6. Let's just say it was 6 values. Okay, so this worked for 6 values, and then you have to do, the mathematical formula for this isn't the mathematical formula for temperature, but you have to do the formula conversion, right? So you have to copy that, right? So at what point have you typed out too much code, right? If you put it in a list, then you just repeat this little bit of stuff one time, right? So, what if I would ask you to do 100 temperatures? Are you going to repeat, are you going to type out this with 100 different variables? That doesn't make sense. And so it makes a lot more sense to do it in a loop. And I mean, if you get out to the professional world and do professional program, it would be expected to do it in a loop. But I mean, if you did it like this for the assignment, it would meet the specifications of the assignment, and I wouldn't count it wrong, but it's not the way I would do it.
Okay, Professor. Yeah, that answers my question. I probably wouldn't want to do it that way.
Okay.
One other thing, Professor. So I tend not to have like, I guess, too much or any questions at the beginning, but if I do as I go along before the late date, or before the assignment is late, would I be able to send it to you if I have a question or not?
Yeah, absolutely. You can send me questions anytime that you want. And if you do have a specific question about your code, please do attach your code to the email. Do note though that if you send the file with the .py extension, it gets stripped
Mhm.
out of the email system. So,
Okay.
so before you,
Text.
yeah, just change the extension to like .txt and send it. And then
Gotcha.
just ask your question and attach the code, and I'll be happy to help.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
All right, going to go ahead and close it down, and I will get this video posted up so you can review at your convenience. All right, thank you all.